Malo alele, bulavanaka, morning true, kia orana, and good morning. Also, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are joining us from across the world and the region. First of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging the Yagara and Turrbal people, the Indigenous people of the land that I'm joining from in Meanjin or Brisbane in Australia, and their elders past, present and emerging. This is a tradition we do in Australia now to acknowledge the original owners of the land that we are joining and working from and acknowledging place and the waters and land we come from. My name is Bronwyn Powell. I'm the team leader and WASH advisor on the Asian Development Bank Technical Assistance Project, Strengthening Water Sanitation Hygiene Behaviours in the Pacific. It's my great honour to be here today to facilitate a session, an online webinar on water tariffs in the Pacific, the current snapshot of issues. Thank you so much for joining. First of all, we'd just like to cover off on some of our housekeeping issues. So we did have quite a lot of registrations. There's a lot of interest in this topic, which is excellent. So it would be great to know who's in the room. Please feel free to introduce yourself, your name and your organisation or project in the chat box so people can see who else is online and get a sense of where they're joining from. Please, throughout the presentations and panel, turn your microphone off, but feel free to use the chat box to raise any questions, react to the presenters, and keep the discussion going. We will have time at the end for a Q&A, question and answer session. So you can save your question until then, or if you put it in the chat box, we'll aim to put it to the panelists at that session. And also in that session, you're able to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. As far as the run of the session, it's fairly straightforward. We'll start with our welcome, both from Asian Development Bank and from the Pacific Water and Wastewater Association. We're happy to be co-host of this webinar series. Then I will provide some opening remarks and introduction to the topic. Then also we will have time for panel discussion. We have 4 panelists joining today, 3 from Fiji and 1 from the Federated States of Micronesia. Then we'll have the closing poll and a group photo to acknowledge everyone who's been able to join. So thank you. Just moving, we have our welcome from Nita Pockrell, who's Director, Water and Urban Development Sector Office at Asian Development Bank. Is Nita online now, Sinead?
Don't believe so.
Okay, we might have to go straight to Lucia. So Lucia Sepaliao is joining us from Samoa and is the CEO of the Pacific Water and Wastewater Association. Thanks so much for joining. We always love your opening remarks. Over to you. Thanks, Lucia.
Thanks very much, Bronwyn. Talo falava, colleagues and friends, and welcome one and all to this, to the first of our webinar series this year. And this series of webinars is made possible through a collaboration between the ADB and BWWA with its member utilities. We are grateful for this collaboration with ADB. The webinar series that so far we've had, I think over the past 3 years, serves as a regional platform to advance knowledge and learning in utility operations and the broader WASH sector. And it has been a useful avenue for sharing knowledge and experiences, but also for building a network of industry and utilities community that share similar challenges and hopefully solutions. Today, we discuss a topic that is crucial to our utilities' ability and viability to provide safe, accessible water to its mandated service areas. And this is a topic of water tariffs. The last BWWA benchmarking report highlighted the range of water pricing across the member utilities, and these vary from no or very low tariffs to very high tariffs, such as in Nauru. And with the exception of a few utilities, cost recovery remains an issue for many BWWA utilities. Setting water tariffs and water tariff reform has always been approached with a bit of fear and special attention from communities. After all, water is a unique product without a substitute, and it is a basic human right. And tariffs have an obvious social impact, but this impact needs to be addressed using social economic instruments that are probably beyond water utility operations and competence. But that's just one consideration. Well, let's hear it from the experts and the leading water specialists that are speaking today. And I'd like to thank you all. There's quite a number of participants joining us. Thank you for joining us in this webinar, and I look forward to listening to the presentations today and also everyone's participation. Thank you, Bronwyn.
Thank you so much, Lucia. Erudite as always, and you touched on so many of the important issues that we need to take into consideration with tariff setting, and that it is a social issue ultimately. Before I go ahead and introduce our speakers today, I would like to take the opportunity to provide a brief introduction to water regulation and tariff setting. It is approached differently around the world in different countries, but there are common models, challenges, and approaches that are used. So to provide some of this theoretical conceptual background before we dive into those specific contexts and issues in the FSM and Fiji. So there are a few reasons why water is a unique commodity. So as Lucia already mentioned, water is a human right, and this is recognised in the Declaration of Human Rights. It's also a precious resource, and it's place-based, and it's vulnerable to climate impacts, both scarcity and overabundance affecting it. It's also heavy and difficult to transport, and as a result, piped water supplies are usually monopoly businesses. And this makes sense because water and wastewater supply services and infrastructure, so the treatment plants, the pipes, the pumps, the meters, etc., are best managed as a whole system to ensure continuity, reliability, and safety of those services. Governments and utilities must balance financial sustainability and the imperatives of those to maintain the systems with public interest outcomes. So, a utility, for example, should receive sufficient income through its tariffs or through its public funding to provide an agreed or expected level of service to its customers. If this isn't in place, then utilities can fall into what we call the vicious cycle of declining service levels, which is both a symptom and also a cause of declining tariff payments. We often find that government will subsidise utilities through grants or mechanisms to fill any revenue gaps. So overall, the purpose of economic regulation is to set, monitor, enforce, and change allowed tariff and service standards for utilities. There are a number of different models that are used to regulate the water sector. So I'll cover off on these very briefly. And I should say I'm not a specialist in this area, but I wanted to set the scene before we jump into these specific examples. There are national and state regulators that are specific to water sanitation and the sector. Usually this is an independent entity separate to government, and it has expertise. It understands those economic mechanisms that Lucia mentioned, and it has an independence, so it can oversee private or public utility providers. Its roles can include things such as providing licenses, setting and monitoring performance standards, setting tariffs, undertaking audits, etc., etc. A multi-sector regulator is similar, except that it may also perform that role for multiple sectors. So, for example, here in Queensland, the Queensland Competition Authority regulates not only water, but also energy, ports, and railways. So these independent regulatory authorities are the norm where utilities are corporatised and ring-fenced entities. So the next model that we can consider is the self-regulation. So self-regulation at a municipal level is common. So that's where a public utility is overseen by a local council or a designated board made up of local government. Regulation may also be done by a government department, so ministry, for example. And this is the traditional form of water supply and sanitation regulation. And it that ministry will also develop policy and operate water systems. Finally, there can be regulation by contract, and these are where performance contracts are set between government and private entity, who becomes then responsible for operation maintenance. And the monitoring of that contract, in effect, becomes a similar function to a regulator. There are also, as you'll see across the bottom, different ways that these models can be mixed or become hybrid models. So deciding on the appropriate model requires wide consultation and usually political and public involvement consultation. Some of the principles to consider, or that are considered by regulators in setting tariffs or whatever body is setting the regulatory framework, is how to recover the costs of providing the service. So usually a tariff should be set at a level that will meet the required or customer expected service. It should also encourage efficient use of the service. So prices should often be structured to signal the cost of delivery to customers, but also, within the case of water, encourage water-saving behaviours, for example, through increasing block tariffs. Another principle to consider is that the cost or the tariff should signal the cost of increasing or augmenting supply. So that means taking into account future capacity needs and investments. So we'll call that often CapEx, new infrastructure. Also, prices should reflect risk and the potential cost to the business to deal with risk or recover from shocks, which we'll increasingly see with climate change and the need to make sure there's operational resilience to those shocks. So that is a very brief overview of a complicated field, and there's plenty of good references and readings out there if you would like to read more on this topic, which we'd be happy to share. But it's useful to keep those in mind as we move to the next part of our webinar. And I see we've moved ahead to the next slide. So my great pleasure now to introduce our speakers. First of all, Casio Kembo Mida is joining us as he's the Chief Executive Officer from the Chuk Public Utility Corporation and Federated States of Micronesia, which is a utility that provides both power, water and sanitation services. He is a lawyer and a businessman and also owns a hotel and a restaurant in Chuk. Joel Abraham is joining us. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission. He has extensive business and public sector experience. Prior to working with FCCC, he was a regulatory compliance, finance and business advisor in the public and private sectors across Australia, Fiji and Tonga. He's a chartered accountant and holds qualifications in public law and international relations. Also joining us today, Seymour Singh, Chief Strategic Information Officer, Water Authority of Fiji, where he manages the research, monitoring, evaluation team, along with information, communication technology, human resources and security services, a big portfolio. He's worked with WAF for over 10 years and holds an MBA from the University of South Pacific. We have also joining us Kavneel Prasad, also with Water Authority of Fiji. Mr. Prasad is the Chief Financial Officer. He is a chartered accountant with 14 years experience in retail, wholesale, manufacturing, distribution and public sectors. He has a bachelor's degree in accounting and banking and a master's degree in professional accounting. Thank you all so much for joining us. Before we jump into a panel, we now would like to invite Kavneel Prasad to present the situation for Water Authority of Fiji and the regulatory framework and also tariffs issues there. Thank you, Kavneel.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Pulavinaka, everyone, from the beautiful country of Fiji. My name is Kavneel Prasad, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Water Authority of Fiji. This presentation mostly deals with the WAF tariff, and I'll be briefing you about the understanding of our current tariff issues, which we are facing as one of the Pacific Island countries. Basically, today I will be taking you through our existing tariff structure, the cost of business study, challenges and the limitations. Overall, WEF is responsible for providing water and wastewater services for the whole of Fiji. At the moment, our service coverage to excess of the drinking water is at 82% at national level, but demarcated to urban, which is 98%, and rural at 58%. For wastewater, the coverage is at 28%, which is very low compared to water coverage. Thank you. Next, please. Okay. We have governance linkages in terms of these crucial documents, which we actually adhere to when we focus on governance issues. For governance within the water sector, this slide depicts the linkages from our global level, from the SDG Goal 6 to the national level. We have our constitution under section 35 and 36 of our constitution. We are required to provide access to adequate quantities of water to all Fijians as per the government's roadmap for the next 5 to 20 years. Our National Development Plan and our WEF Act 27 are the key legislations governing our water utility. And at utility level, we have our strategic plan and corporate plan with our annual business plan that articulates our annual business activities. The slide actually shows the comparison of our current tariff structure with the other Pacific Island countries. Fiji, as you can see in the graph, Fiji is the cheapest in the Pacific, which is at 15 cents per unit. A unit is 1,000 liters. The cost of producing a unit is $1.20. WEF has a free water allowance, which benefits 151,000 people. Offering a free water allowance can help alleviate the financial burden on low-income households. It ensures that even those facing economic challenges can meet their essential water needs without straining their budgets. And on top of that, access to clean and safe water is considered a fundamental human rights. Providing a certain amount of free water ensures that everyone has access to the essential resources for their basic needs. This slide shows our existing tariff structure. Our annual revenue per annum is approximately 42 million, which is about 21 million USD. Majority of our revenue is collected from residential customers, which is 56%, followed by commercial customers at 33%. In Fiji, the average bill per quota is around $25 Fijian, or $12 to $13 US. To disconnect and reconnect a meter, it costs us approximately $100 to carry out the exercise. And that's a substantial cost when we compare it to the revenue we are collecting. And our average tariff is at $25 for a quota. And this leads to further arrears because it's not viable for us to actually, financially viable for us to actually disconnect a $20 bill accounts if they are in arrears. Thank you. So our next slide is it actually depicts in terms of customer consumption blocks. Majority of our residential customers are using between 51 to 100 units. This is around 35% of the usage. We have a current challenge in terms of revenue collection and how much budget we are allocated. It has a significant difference in it. The forecasted cost of service and capital investment will continue to grow as our number of connections grow. In addition, every year there is also inflation, which impacts our operational and maintenance cost. which impacts our budget as well. So we've received a total budget of 250 million for our current financial year, of which 118 million is for capex, and 132 million is for 118 million is for opex, and 132 million is for capex. Our and compared to our revenue, which stands at 42 million. So we are facing financial challenges, which we are trying to solve through a tariff review exercise. And we have the lowest tariff. Some of the financial challenges we are facing at the moment is that we have the lowest tariff in the region or in the world. It has been about 20 years since the domestic tariff has not been revised. As mentioned earlier, our revenue is not sufficient to even cover our operating expenditures. We are dependent on the government grants provided to cater for our budget. With our forecasted investment of 1.4 billion, our revenue is not able to cater for the projected investment. Hence, a revision of tariff is required to cover at least our operational costs. Thank you, everyone. That's it from me for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kavneel. That's an excellent outline of the challenges that WAF is facing with the current levels of tariffs and the revenue that you receive from government grants, as well as from collecting tariffs. I'd like to now go and put a question to the CEO of the Fijian Competition Consumer Commission, Joel Abraham. I mean, we've heard that WAF is definitely facing some challenges when it comes to the very low tariff that is currently charged amongst the lowest in the Pacific, excluding Cook Islands, which doesn't yet have a tariff. What is the FCCC's response to WAF's call to increase tariffs, and what are the steps that are required for a change in tariff to occur, both in the regulatory framework and the economic analysis of what that tariff might be?
Well, thank you, Bronwyn. I think it's very interesting question, and everybody in Fiji for the last year or so, since WEF have been undertaking their consultation or developing their 2050 strategy, we've all been focusing on the levels of tariffs. And while as the regulator, we do understand that tariff reviews must happen, I think the overall issues that we face or that we see is one of political will. Because WEF is a government department. I think when you look at the overall governance framework, if the governance framework is set out properly, then we will not be having conversations as to why 20 years has passed and tariffs have not been increased. I can give you an example of as of the past year or so. So I've met with the predecessor of Dr. Amit, who's the current CEO of WEF, Barry Omanson. We started the tariff review process well in advance, and at that point in time, I think Seymour was with the FCCC as well. And I've observed this not only with the Water Authority, but with the sugar, with FSC as well. I think when sectors that are highly regulated because of their nature of being a monopoly, I think one thing that needs to happen in developing countries like Fiji and other Pacific Island countries is to have a clarity on the economic governance model. Right now, I think because WEF is heavily dependent on government grants, I think last year was a tune of 105 million. The regulatory framework has largely been over the past 20 years left unexplored, and I think I must give credit to Seymour Singh, who's also on this call. He was with the FCCC, and since his return to Water Authority, he joined us from Water Authority, and then he was with us with the FCCC as our deputy CEO, and then the acting CEO for the Consumer Council, and then he went back to Water Authority, and he's done quite a lot of legwork in getting the tariff review process up and running. And basically, the factors that we would look at is not that the cost is the lowest in the Pacific, is we would look at what is the cost of service delivery, the need for infrastructure investments. We'd look at the overall impact to consumers as well. The FCCC's primary role here is to ensure that tariffs are, one, fair, they are reasonable, and they reflect the actual cost of service for the provision of the service itself. And we will do so by promoting financial sustainability of the utility provider, in this case, Water Authority. And the steps for the tariff change would be a detailed submission of proposal from WEF. I think there has been a few back and forths, and we are waiting in terms of understanding what the 2019 figures were, and that was the last submission, and what the current figures would look like, given that COVID has basically thrown the spanner into the wheels of most business operations. So business operations and costs do not are not similar to what they were at pre-COVID levels. We would engage in public consultations by calling for submissions from stakeholders, including consumers. As you correctly pointed out, that water is a basic right, and even within our constitution that Kavneel touched upon as well, it is an right enshrined within the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. So the Constitution basically says the state must ensure that they take progressive realization of this right, and in doing so, provide support to WEF and regulatory support to the FCCC. Now, speaking of regulatory support, we will be evaluating the proposals based on the service quality, consumer affordability, and the financial health of WEF. As Kavneel has said, there are certain aspects to which they find issues for the water tariffs. These issues, basically, this aspect would, I think the major one that they face is that it can't cover the operational cost. So what we would do is basically look at what the revenue requirement is and what would be the expected return on investment. Now, there's a question that we had asked that we are still waiting for some response from the Ministry of Finance or government, to say whether there should be returns provided on existing infrastructure that was funded largely by taxpayers, and whether taxpayers should be required to pay an increased rate for the maintenance and upkeep, or should it be funded through tariffs. I think that is one question that has largely been unanswered by government. So we are still waiting for consultation outcomes from government as well, and we will be moving fairly quickly. I have committed to the Water Authority that we are giving them the next cycle of our review would be looking at water tariffs. So tomorrow I'd be making some announcement on the energy tariffs, and the next review exercise that will be touching on is water, and that will be part of my public announcement tomorrow as well.
Thank you, Joel. I mean, it does sound like there are a lot of different factors that need to be considered, and it was interesting to hear you say that the issue of the regulatory framework was largely explored for a long time. Maybe if I could quickly go to you, Seymour, and get your reaction to what you would see as the important next steps to make sure that there is, I guess, a pathway, and also your take on whether corporatisation is an essential part of that agenda, or there can be a pathway without that happening.
Well, thank you, Ms. Pao. We have gone through a number of stages since 2010. So 2010, we were formed as a corporate entity, a commercial statutory authority, and the government in its discussion now at the national level is looking at, and the latest discussions are that we need to get corporatized. We have done consultations in the 3 regions. The state of the water is known throughout Fiji, and the people are telling us that we are ready to pay you more. So as far as us collecting, or rather at least being break even in terms of cost of service and the collections, we need to corporatize before any tariff changes are done. Or if it's done without being corporatized, then good. But going forward, we wouldn't like to be in a situation where we were for the last 20 years. And when we say 20 years, in the year 99, the tariff was not increased. VAT was removed, so it actually got decreased, because before VAT was added a component to tariff. So in the year 99, tariff was even well before that. The only change that was made was in the 2016 budget. The government had announced the increase of commercial tariff from 53 cents to $6 per unit. So going forward, if we do not make these changes according to current water sector strategy 2050, which is now in its finalization, we require around 8 billion in wastewater water to invest in the next 27 years, next 3 decades. Then only we'll be able to improve the water and wastewater services come 2050. So we are talking about improvement by 2050, gradual improvement, gradual investments. So which also means that if we are heavily dependent on government grants, then we'll get what they can give us. But if we are able to restructure our cost of service against tariff models, then we are able to secure public-private partnerships to be able to work towards infrastructure, building of infrastructure in Fiji for water and wastewater services. And accessibility, at the moment we have 82% accessibility for water and around 28% wastewater. So the only driving factor, as Kavneel has pointed out, is an attempt to recover costs and at least make some profits to be able to seek funding from multilateral banks like Asian Development Bank or World Bank or European Investment Bank. Even technical assistance from United Nations, currently all these are secured through government, through the Ministry of Finance. So at the moment, at the utility level, we don't have much teeth to bite because we do not recover our costs. So that is heavily dependent of tariff review and also us being corporatized. And I believe those are already in motion. So that at the government in National Economic Summit, the water is a priority. And by this year, they're already in discussions of how to move us from being a government grant-based utility towards a self-sustaining model in terms of water and wastewater services. But yes, we are a monopoly, so that's where FCCC comes in, that they need to regulate us. And so we have ethical business practices as well as we go forward. Yeah. And we welcome regulations. We welcome ethical business models as well.
Thank you, Seymour. That makes it very clear, I think, to our audience of the situation and probably the best path forward that WAF would seek to see those changes ahead. I'm very conscious, Kimbo's been sitting there very patiently waiting to explain the situation in the Northern Pacific and Chook. Chook, if I could hand to you now, Kimbo, with a question. If you could explain the situation you have there in Chook with water and sanitation tariff setting and regulation, and acknowledging that you're providing both water and sanitation services, if there's a similar approach, principles to setting that framework and tariffs, it'd be great to hear what the context is and the challenges and issues you're facing.
Thank you, Bronwyn. It's a pleasure to be here today. I have a lot to say, but I'm going to try to keep it under a few minutes. Chook is a very small utility, which means we have a small customer base. We're very remotely located, which means it's very expensive to get anything here from products to services. We lack the technical skills in the islands here. We're very small. We have 500 water customers and 2,500 power customers on this island, 15,000 people. Now, although we are a very small utility, it doesn't mean it's very easy to run. Actually, I'd say it's very difficult to run because it's a smaller customer base. We are very fortunate. We don't get any subsidies. However, we cover almost 100% of our operational costs, including depreciation. How do we do that? Power subsidizes water and sanitation. For water, we do cover 100% of operation, although not depreciation. We currently have a $35 million grant from the Asian Development Bank to put in new water lines. It will triple our water customer base so that the 2,500 power customers will basically be 2,500 water customers as well. We have old asbestos pipes that were put in here in the 60s by the US. It's never been used. It's deteriorated and no one wants to touch them. So under this ADB grant, we're putting in a new water system, new water treatment plant, smart meters, prepaid meters, SCADA system, pressure loggers, flow meters. We even have a water expert on tariff who did a tariff review. And if you look at our law requires four things before you change the tariff. One is you have to look at the overall economy of the state. Number two, you have to look at the financial condition of the utility under the current rate. And you have to look at whether the new proposed rate will improve the operation and economic efficiency of the utility. And finally, customers' ability to pay. However, Chuk is one of the poorest, FSM is one of the poorest countries in the whole Pacific. I think we're second to last in lowest GDP. And Chuk is even poorer, is the poorest state in the FSM. So I bring that up because balancing what the utility needs versus what people can afford is very difficult. And let me say, the last time we changed our tariff was never. We were created in 1996 and the water tariff has never been changed before. We have 5 board of directors who are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. I'm pretty sure the governor tells them one thing when he appoints them: do not raise the tariff during my governorship. Nobody wants to have something that says tariff is increased. They basically lose their seats. So it's a big challenge, but the blessing for us is we have a tariff expert review paid for by this $35 million grant. We're very transparent in sharing this information to the politicians on Facebook. And so when we move to raise the tariff, we feel that we're going to have the support from the people. We've also done surveys, house-to-house surveys, and the willingness to pay is there. Affordability is kind of the issue because most people can afford what we're offering today, which is, I think, $1 to $2 for 4,000 gallons. So if we have to increase the tariff, it's going to be quite difficult because it's a poor place. So we have no subsidies. We're basically 100% covering costs and depreciation. But I think as we add more customers, we'll be able to really be sustainable. Thank you.
Thanks. It's very different context, of course, to Fiji, but really interesting to hear how you've managed to get it to be cost recovery and including depreciation. Can I just ask the process, so our audience can understand, if there is a process of increasing the tariff, how does that work in Chuk?
It takes 30 days. So you post the proposed rates, you have to have public hearings, and then 30 days after that, the tariff takes effect, assuming you get positive results from the public hearings. As I said, the tariff has never been changed since CPUC was created in 1996. So once we do this, it will be the first time we ever do it. I think if there's too much pushback, within the 30 days, the legislature will likely call a hearing and the governor will try to step in with the board members to tell management that they should not make the change. But we have an obligation when we signed our grant documents with the Asian Development Bank that the political will would support the grant. So we're hoping that we get full support from all sides, but it takes 30 days, and we haven't done it before. It'll be a first for us.
Yeah, okay, thanks for explaining that. And yeah, it is a very politicized issue. I wonder if Kavneel or Seymour, and I think Joel is online, although he seems to have dropped off my panel group. Oh, you are here, great. If any of you from Fiji would like to comment on, I guess, that political issue of, as Kembo mentioned, governors perhaps having a very limited appetite to increase tariffs from a political point of view. If there's a situation similar in Fiji, and what's the way to influence or affect change given that political reticence?
Yeah, if I may, I think it's better that I take that question. Yeah, we always will come up with political interference, especially, I mean, if you look at post-COVID, the entire planet has been on a pathway to high levels of inflation. And because of the inflationary pressures in the market, and if you look at all elections around the globe, one major issue that comes up is cost of living, and water is one of the most basic items as part of the consumer basket. So it is not unusual for politicians to want to restrict increases, because politics is all about getting support from the people by showing what government can do best for them. And I think in this instance, there is a general consensus in Fiji, given the ideation workshop that WEF had undertaken, is that water tariffs need to be increased. There is a general consensus. I mean, despite that general consensus with everybody in government, including the fiscal review committee that looked at working up the national budget, we still had one of the ministers, well, not one of the ministers, the minister responsible for Water Authority, the Minister for Infrastructure, had gone on public record saying tariffs won't be increased as far as I'm around, because it's inhumane on people to increase tariffs at this point in time. Now, since then, we've had multiple conversations with government saying, why don't we calculate what the commercially feasible tariff rates would be, and what is the revenue requirement for Water Authority to operate. Now, we did this by having the conversation with government saying, look, you're currently giving them X amount of dollars. I think this year was 105 million Fijian dollars. How do you know that that amount is exactly the right amount? The amount that you should be giving to Water Authority could be higher or lower depending on what is the commercially feasible tariff rates, which is what is the cost of them providing the service. Now, once we are able to ascertain that cost, the subsidy levels or the grant levels can match that. If you don't want the people to pay, that's fine. Government can come in and subsidize. However, there are other issues that need considerations, issues that that resource owners, like landowners, are they adequately compensated? Do they need the level of compensation reviewed? If it's been the same for the last 20 years or so, and cost of living has gone up, and if you look at last 20 years, what you could buy for a particular dollar is not the same today. Purchasing power of the dollar has been lost. So if that has happened, what should be the most feasible rate of tariffs? And when you look at the politician and you drive the discussion by saying, look, we are going to not only look at tariffs now, but we're going to look at tariffs in the future. When we talk about what Seymour had said, we can't meet the requirements of Fiji if we don't invest now, because the 2050 strategy says this. But guess what? The politician has only a very short span of political life. They look at things in 4-year cycles when the elections happen. So their focus is generally on the political front. So what we have to do as regulators is bring the economics into the political discussions and say, let's have a socio-economic discussion. Let's look at how best can we frame this so that everybody wins. We need to ensure that Water Authority gets on its 2 feet. The government providing grants can no longer be the way in which we support Water Authority, and some steps have been taken to towards this. And let's now ensure that not only do we address the issues that we are currently facing, but Fiji has seen what can happen if you ignore or neglect the water sector. In the Suvarnasori corridor, there are times when people have to be rationed, and water has to be rationed, and they have to be on guard as to when this happens. So they have intermittent supply of water. Now, because this has become a reality, everybody can see what happens when you don't fix the problem. So I think which makes Seymour, mine, and Kavneel's jobs easier with the politicians to say, look, we need to ensure that we are able to review this so that in the future this is not the problem. And that's one way to go towards it. And the second way is, how do you make it sweet for the politicians? So one of the things we have suggested to government is, let the tariff review process continue, and what we can do is, if you are still keen on subsidizing this, you're already giving grants, you can turn those grants into subsidies and tell the Fijian people that you are subsidizing for their water usage. As it is, there is a high degree of subsidy in the water sector. I think a total of about 154,000, if I'm correct, or plus families or households are being subsidized, which is a high amount of subsidy. And you generally would subsidize the cost if the cost was so high. Now we have a situation where the costs are so low, yet we are subsidizing. So there is some leg room to move. Maybe to look at social protection policies like doing means testing to see who should really qualify for these incentives or for the subsidies from government. So there's a multifaceted approach that we're using when we're discussing with the politicians. There's no one size fits all. And one thing I've learned in my 15 years in the public sector is you never tell the politician directly that they are wrong. You approach it indirectly, and mostly you are able to get what you want achieved if you present enough facts, you have enough data to support your case. And I think in this instance we have everything we need.
Thank you so much, Joel. You can leave your camera on. We'll keep the panel spotlighted throughout this session. Yeah, I like the way you said, how can you make it, thinking about how you can make it sweet for the politician as well. So making it a win-win. So like, for example, the improving the services is going to be a politically favourable activity as well. We do have a question. Nita Pockrell has hopped online now. So she's the director of the Water Urban Development in the Asian Development Bank, Pacific and Southeast Asia Department. Nita, would you like to pop your camera on and then say your question rather than just in the chat, but out loud?
Sure. Can you hear me, Bronwyn?
Yes, all good. Thank you.
Okay. My apologies. This gives you a taste of traffic in Manila. I was totally stuck and I was very late, but I did catch a fair amount of the discussion. So really appreciate that. Yeah, I think Joel already was coming on to, as I was typing this, on this issue of cross subsidy, and I really enjoyed. I think Kembo, you mentioned, is there a will for politicians from any country in the world, not just in the Pacific, to raise tariff? And the answer is never. But the cross-subsidizing within either power or water, if you're covering both commercial or residential, when you're covering both, the high-end customers and informal settlements is a reality for all water utilities. I know for Fiji, WAF colleagues here, you already have very, very low base. But yeah, for the others online and for any of you, what has worked? I mean, I think somehow bringing the cost recovery to a certain level is a must. With paying customers. So we all must remain working on that. But cross-subsidizing within the utility for the people's informal settlements, finding service delivery. And I also like Kembo mentioning, we must add more customers. That means your pool is larger. So some of the ways I'm keen to understand if there's something that has worked in either with WAF or I think with Chuk, this is the first time you'd be raising the tariff, but others online, what smart ways of cost subsidizing that has worked for you to make sure that we don't leave behind, especially informal settlements and lower income customers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nita. Seymour, I wonder if you'd like to respond on that and the free allocation or any other subsidies that you've put in place for, I guess, more vulnerable parts of the community.
Thank you. Well, for Fiji, we have told you our status quo, but while carrying out research before the 2019 submission that we have made to FCCC, there are various models of tariff that is available around the globe. And the first thing to do is to identify what is our cost of service as a utility. And the entire discussion comments with our regulators and the government once we made a submission that this is our cost. It's another thing that it's not implemented yet, but it will be, given that when we submitted, probably COVID had hit at the same time. And to increase the tariff was not a good choice as a nation. But the first thing we did was to identify what is our cost of service. We looked at other models around the globe whereby they were under the government, and they moved away from the government-controlled framework to a utility that is self-sustaining. If you look at Scotland, if you look at UK Water, and they've published water. That's where we learned about Water Sector 2050 strategy, that we need to think beyond utility. Most of the utility are thinking at the utility level, which we did also from 2010. Now we are thinking beyond utility, that the strategy has to be at a national level, driven by the government. Then obviously the commercial statutory authority like WEF or CHUK or anybody will start probably aligning, because the government is driving that. And yes, Joel is also correct that every politician looks at 4-year term because that's what they're looking for. But then once the government starts driving this and has a national strategy, then even new governments coming in has to align. Because just to let you know, we are still yet to finalize our Water Sector 2050 strategy and launch it. We are aiming at on World Water Day on 22nd of March. And by now, we already have support from the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, United Nations, European Investment Bank. Even so that the World Bank has funded our ideation workshop and ready to fund the finalization of the Water Sector 2050 strategy. So that level of support has come because we are doing it at national level. And probably this is one way that people can look at, and also look at ethical business model for regulation. So as far as regulation is concerned, there are various models that work for. In Scotland, they have used the ethical business model, whereby the utility, the regulator, and the government, the representative of the people, sat down and agreed on a particular model. That all parties know about it, and all parties knew what the input and outputs of those models are. When that level of discussions and that level of maturity is there, then probably changes would be a bit faster. But then we are not looking in months; we're still looking at in years. So there is no right answer, but first we need to know our cost of service and look at which model serves us best, that has been practiced or been successful around the globe. I hope I have answered what I was trying to get, Paul.
I think, yeah, that's really useful, Seymour. And I think that point of it needing to move beyond a kind of technical economic analysis cost of service to moving into that well-facilitated and yes, probably long period of consultation, which is a national government-led or level conversation around what is a regulatory model. And then I like the way that you've been able to draw on a case study that you think is suitable from Scotland, or has similarities to what you're trying to achieve in Fiji. We've had a couple of comments in from the chat. One is around the similarities with, from example, in transport in New South Wales, where I guess continuous neglect and declining services has had a negative impact, and the power of communicating that to politicians and trying to get some shift that way. There's also a question that's come in from Dean Taylor around whether or not your service standards have been defined, like what service standard you're aiming to meet, and whether that's been communicated to customers as part of their willingness to pay in the tariff setting. So perhaps to you, Kembo, and we might go then to WAF, and then I think we'll almost be on the hour and ready to wrap up after that. Kembo?
Sorry, Bronwyn, I didn't hear the question. I was reading the chat.
Oh,
Could
yeah,
you repeat
it's
it, please?
around defining the service level. So whether or not that's taken into consideration when you're determining the tariff that you want to charge. So is it 24-hour service, the quality, et cetera, et cetera? Yes,
we're looking to do 24-hour service, certain pressure level, potable water. We check the chlorine every week, so we have to have certain chlorine level. EPA oversees the quality of the water, so we are looking at good standards here in terms of the quality of the water and getting it to them 24/7. We're hoping not to have to ration. There was a hydrogeologist study done a few years ago that says CHUK could survive off of the deep wells that we have. Even if we hit a one-in-a-lifetime drought, we should be able to have water under the island for up to a year. 95% of our water comes from deep wells. So we do want to increase the surface water. As I mentioned earlier, we're putting in a new treatment plant, which will give us 2 water treatment plants. We're hoping to have a 70-30. As you know, it's much more expensive to bring water from 100 feet below the ground and chlorinate it and put it right into the to the homes. You want to push all that water up to water tank and gravity feed the system. We generate 20 million gallons a month and we lose 50%, 10 million gallons. We're hoping with the new water project, with the SCADA system and the flow meters, pressure loggers, we're going to be able to bring down our water losses from 50% to maybe mid-20s. And I think that will directly affect our ability to provide or meet those standards. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kembo. And maybe to you, Seymour and WAF, on where your service levels fit in your tariff decisions.
So at the moment, and probably Joel can correct me, in Fiji, our regulation doesn't define, our regulatory model is more specific to tariff. And tariff has yet to be set by our regulator for the last 20 or 25 years. So in water sector, but they've done it for energy and other areas, regulated areas. As far as the levels of service is concerned, we have a charter that we try to live by. We have developed our own charter. So we try to live by it. And one of them is maintaining a pressure of 1 bar, which is 10 meters of water, 10-meter height of water, 1 bar pressure, 24/7 availability, response time in terms of complaints and so forth. So we have a charter. It's also shared on our website. But the drawback is that in order to implement charter and achieve the set goals, we need at least the tariff to be supportive enough to be able to live up to those standards of expectation. So tariff, whereby is one part of the regulatory model, but a very important part. So if that is done, then at least it pushes the service levels, and that's where the FCCC will come and say, hey, your recovering cost, we have adjusted your tariffs, but your levels of service are down. What's happening? They can check us in terms of maintaining service levels. At the moment, we can't do both. We neither can maintain the service levels we are trying to, no, the regulator can come and say, hey, you have to maintain service, knowing that the tariffs are low. So agree with Dean Taylor that we need to have service level strategies, which we have, but it needs to be pushed up by enough resources to be able to meet those service levels. And I think the people in our country realize that it is so bad that FCCC was present in the 3 regions when we were doing consultation. We put up a thermometer whereby there was 15 cents right to $10. And no one took a sticker. None of the people, either in commercial or in domestic, as a customer, they never put a sticker near 15 cents. They put it all above, around $2, $2.50. They were ready to pay more because they want a better service. So I think it could be a blessing in disguise that the service is so bad that the people are saying we are ready to pay more, as long as you promise us a better service. Yeah. So it could be a blessing in disguise for water. And we are working with, Kavneel is working with FCCC. He's in charge of increasing tariff or addressing tariff issues. So I think he's doing a good job. He's already having a discussions. And probably we'll have it done within an year or 2 years' time. And that depends on both regulator and us and the government of the day.
Thank you, Seymour.
So if I have answered your question, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the customer charter and also the role of the regulator in ensuring the reporting of that service level, defining the service level, and then having some checks and balances and transparency around whether that service level is being provided. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. We have unfortunately reached the hour, so we will go to our final closing slides. But again, thank you so much all for joining. Particularly fantastic to have you here, Joel, as the regulator, and very pleased to hear your viewpoints on all of these issues, as well as the utilities who are regular attendees at these webinars. I'd just like to close with some takeaway messages from our session. So I guess for me, there's no one best fit, one size fits all for a regulatory framework that's going to work in a middle or lower income country, but it needs to fit the political and institutional framework of that country. And it's also important that that framework allows those tariffs to be based on the cost of service, as we heard very clearly, and that it meets customer service levels as agreed, and that there's a good consultation process with all stakeholders for those to be set. Those overall principles, utilities, governments and regulators should look for tariffs that seek to improve financial sustainability of the utility and improve service provider performance and meet those customer charter agreements, and also ensure that there are some pro-poor mechanisms to ensure that water is available to the most vulnerable, and in the Pacific, those increasing connections to informal settlements. Also making sure that there's accountability, transparency and customer involvement. Thank you, Sinead. I still wanted to let everyone know that our next webinar will also be about tariffs, but more on the operationalisation of them and ensuring equity and affordability. So I think we'll draw out more of that that question you put to us, Nita, about equity and making sure that there's access for everyone and increasing connections to those that don't yet have them in informal settlements. I think we're moving into our poll. If you're able to share that in the chat, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Sinead. Okay, there we go. This is a chance for us to just ask if you've learned anything new or expanded your knowledge today. 2 very quick questions, if you don't mind completing it. That helps us with our understanding of whether we've hit the mark with sharing knowledge and supporting learning across the region. Give it a little bit longer. Okay, I think we might leave it there. Thank you so much for those responses. And then I think what we'd like to do, if you don't mind, we'd like to take a group photo of all of those, everyone who's attended today. So if you don't mind, please turn on your camera and we'll get a screenshot to see all your smiling faces. And thank you so much to all of you who did contribute in the chat. It was great to see the discussion was going on there as well. So Sinead, I'll just, if you don't mind, just letting me know when you've taken the photo. Everyone has to smile. You can see your happy smile, Nita.
Taking the photo.
Are we all good? Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Nita, maybe I'll offer if you'd like to make any closing remarks before we sign off.
Thank you, Bronwyn, and thank you, Seymour and Kavneel and Joel and Kembo from Chuk Water Utility. Really insightful. I'm sorry I got stuck and came slightly later. As you know, I have joined as the Director of Pacific Region at the ADB for Water and Urban Development. It will be my pleasure to meet you in person soon. Both utility as well as the regulator. You've raised very, very important issues, and Bronwyn, thank you for summarizing and facilitating. National leadership is extremely important. So is regulator maturity. We have regulators, but getting to where we want the regulators, enabling them, building their capacity, helping regulators do what they're supposed to do well is a different matter, and we continue supporting that. We will be supporting FCCC in Fiji also, and also looking at giving utilities the data, the baseline, your service standards, the power to set a good baseline to start with when you do your analysis, to take to the regulators, giving regulators the powers that are not politically thwarted. These are all very important topics, and I'm sure we'll continue to discuss them and learn from each other. The process, and I think Kembo and others talked about it, making the process easier, involving stakeholders. Water is a politicized matter, whether we like it or not. It's life, it's human right, or at the same time, but the authorities utilities do need cost recovery, whether it's tariff or transfers or taxes. You know, we say all 3 T's are okay for cost recovery, but what we need is the predictability of each of these streams of T coming into the utility so they can continue providing services to the poor. So as we talk about tariffs, with the same breath, we talk with the governments if we can also look at the other 2 T's. So yeah, adding more customers, enabling the utilities to capture more and cross-subsidize. And I'm glad to see Bronwyn and colleagues, the next WASH webinar focused on the equity and affordability part. It's great for us. We look forward to working with all of you. We look forward to finding ways to work on all of these, the enabling environment, the regulator capacity, the regulator maturity, and also the utility to play the part. So that's it. And then lastly, I think communications and awareness are critical. Not just communications to the customers, but also to politicians, and again, whoever is influential in the arena. CBOs, NGOs, in some countries, church communities, local groups, local indigenous community leaders, because it really all matters and it all comes together. It's not as simple as just a technical issue. It's really about perceptions and behaviors, and there's always willingness to pay. It's the willingness to charge is the matter here. So thank you again. I'm really thankful to join and thankful to the presenters, and look forward to the next webinar. Over to you. Thank you, Bronwyn.
Thank you so much, Nita. Excellent summary at the end, and I think I like that closing comment you made. Thank you again also for everyone for joining. Pleasure to have you all on here. Thanks again to our panelists, and also Sinead Lehane, who has been doing so much work with all the coordinating from our team. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.